Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged Plus podcast. Really, this is going to be good. I really enjoyed talking to today's guest. He's been on the show before. Mark Jacobson is an incredibly influential thinker, writer, scientist, engineer. This is a book that I have read and studied, and I can't say I've just sat down and read through it because we're talking super dense, proper scientific research, just incredible stuff. And it is about how we can be 100% running on clean, renewable energy. And that is Mark's thing. He's been doing this for years. He's had an immense impact on the world, on the technology, on giving people the confidence to go, yes, we can do it with 100% renewables. We don't have to have baseline nuclear, which is we're always argued. We don't have to use biogas. We don't have to try and do carbon capture and storage. I'm just thinking of all the things that we discuss in this episode. You're going to love it. It's really, really good. And we particularly I just want you to peel your ears for the discussion we have about how much concrete is used in the construction of a modern contemporary nuclear power plant. There's a reference about Miami and Seattle, and it's worth just quickly having a quick gander at a Google map just to see how far apart those two cities are. That is what we're doing today. Just before we start, I want to say a couple of things. Is that, well, for a start, we're going to be in San Diego. It's getting much, much nearer. We're in San Diego, California, on the 10th and 11th of. I wrote it down so I would, but now I can't find the page. Where did I write that down? I know I did. Yeah, 10th and 11th of September. It is the 10th and 11th. I keep thinking it's the 11th and 12th. It's not. It's the 10th and 11th at San Diego Convention Center. And I'm really praying that Mark will appear there, because he is so good, and he lives in California, so it's not so far for him to travel. But there's so many amazing speakers we're getting lined up there. Some really cool YouTube mates that cover the similar area to us are coming along. It's going to be amazing. And of course, the Aptera is now one of our main cars that's on display there, which is just fabulous. We're really excited about that. So really genuinely looking forward to that. Apparently, I've been told by many people, September in San Diego is a beautiful month. So we're going at the right time of year. Very glad about that. And I promise when I'm in San Diego, I won't do my terrible, soppy, fake American accent. I will stay British to the core. Just before we start, though, let me also mention, apart from San Diego, I've started talking about live shows. Also, I want to mention Sydney in March 2023. And I'm not going to do an Australian accent, but I'm really looking forward to it. No, that's going to be fantastic. And I will be there with my missus, who is Australian, for those of you who don't know. So most my children have got Australian passports. I've got a visa. That's about it. So looking forward to that as well. But before we start now, I just want to mention our lovely pals over at My Energy, who are the long-term sponsors of the Fully Charged Plus podcast. And I've mentioned it before, but I'm going to mention it again with pride. With pride. I'm not mentioning it out of embarrassment. I'm mentioning it out of pride. The technology they make is amazing. I use it in my house every day. I've used it yesterday, was Sunshine Central in the United Kingdom. And I added a token. So it was in two cars. So I added 55 miles range to my wife's car, the Hyundai Kona. And I added 102 miles range to the Tesla Model 3 from solar and nothing else. We didn't use one electron of electricity from the grid. We charged those two cars. And that was courtesy of the Zappy by My Energy, because the Zappy just takes all the electricity that comes off your solar panels and you're not using in the house, and it puts it in your car. And if you start to use some electricity in the house, turn the kettle on, put the washing machine on, then the amount that goes to the car reduces. And then once your washing's done or you take the kettle off, the amount increases. And the Zappy works that out. You do nothing. You don't have to go and plug things in or check. It just does it automatically. It's brilliant. And then alongside the Zappy, inside the house, so the Zappy's outside where we charge the card. Inside the house is the Eddy. Eddy lives in a cupboard, and that controls all the electricity in the house. So it maximizes the economy of how we use electricity. So it will start filling up the hot water. If there's a lot of excess solar, it will heat all our hot water up. It will also do the same. Sorry, I'm just getting all sorts of messages. It will do the same in. I didn't get messages. I'm just getting weird things in my ears. I don't even need these in my ears. There we go. That's much better. It will also heat the thermal store in our Tepio boiler. I don't know what else to call it. Boiler doesn't sound right. The thing that heats the central heating in the house, which we definitely don't need at the moment because it is quite toasty warm in the UK at the moment. So there's that, and those two things work together beautifully. It's a really tightly run system. I have to do very, very nothing little. But if I need to, I can use the My Energy app, and that will control everything. And I'm going to show that to you now because it's so useful. I'm going to see what it's doing now. Well, I've got 6 kilowatts coming off the solar panels, and 0.6 of a kilowatt because it's late. It's not got any, then it's cloudy and it's raining at the moment, but I'm still getting 0.6 of a kilowatt. I'm getting 0.6 of a kilowatt coming out of the battery and 1.2 kilowatts being used in the house. And that's all shown to me there on a very simple to understand thing. And I can see how much electricity I have generated today. Very bad day today, 26.2 kilowatt hours. That's rubbish. I was over 67 kilowatt hours yesterday. So that shows you the difference. But 26.2 kilowatt hours, I'm saying that's rubbish. That's more than most houses consume in a day. So like all the electricity. So that's what My Energy does. And they do it brilliantly well. It's worth going to have a look at their website, myenergy.com, MYENERGI.com. Go and check them out. They are amazing. And they're bringing out some amazing new products very soon, which will help even further to allow us to reduce our reliance on fossil fuel, which is exactly what we're talking about today. So please welcome onto the Fully Charged Plus podcast, Mark Jacobson. Your achievements in the last, I guess, 20, 30 years have been truly remarkable. I mean, you have pushed the notion that we can stop burning fossil fuel, if nothing else, right, and survive as a civilization. I mean, that is the kind of baseline of what you've been arguing for. Am I right in saying that? Is that a fair...
Yeah, well, I've been looking my whole career at trying to understand air pollution and climate problems and then trying to develop clean, renewable energy solutions to them. I mean, my goal has always been to eliminate air pollution. We shouldn't be exposed to chemicals in the air from people's pollution, from people's energy use, which is most pollution is from energy use, human pollution, about 90%, and maybe 75 to 80% of the greenhouse gases are also from energy use. Why should people breathe in chemicals that other people are spewing out from their automobiles, for example? So I tried to understand those problems and then come up with solutions to them that not only address air pollution and not only address climate, but then also address energy security, because we need to have secure energy sources for generations and centuries to come.
And I mean, I think two of those things that have been highlighted for me in the last 10 years. There's a very tragic case in the UK, which you may be aware of a young girl. I think she was 9 years old, Ella Kissy Deborah, who was the first person in the UK to have on her death certificate, she had asthma attacks as a child. She lived near a very busy road in London, and she was the first person in our history to have cause of death air pollution, because the two things were linked so closely. On really bad, heavy pollution days, she had terrible asthma. and when there was a nice strong wind blowing through, she didn't. And it was so obvious what was happening, and no one could deny. And the coroner, it's the first time a coroner has put air pollution as cause of death. I think it's happened a few times since, but she was the first very tragic case.
Well, worldwide, 7 million people die from air pollution, but their listed cause of death is either heart disease, respiratory illness, asthma, stroke, chronic bronchitis, emphysema. It could be lung cancer, tracheal cancer. Air pollution is a contributing factor or triggers, in fact, like if you have a heart attack in polluted air, you're more likely to die from that pollution from that heart attack than if you have a heart attack in clean air. Right. And in worldwide, of the 7 million people who die, 20% are children under the age of 5 years old who die maybe of pneumonia because air pollution weakens their immune system. And then when they get sick, they develop pneumonia. Just like when people die of COVID, they really die of pneumonia a lot of times because their immune system is so sick, so weak that when pneumonia attacks them, they just can't recover. Yeah. So air pollution is not listed on death certificates, but it is the primal cause of death worldwide. It's the second leading cause of death worldwide, about over 7 million people per year.
Wow. And was that, because I'm intrigued on what brought you into this realm. Was it the air pollution problem initially? It was like that is something that I really would love to
well, yes, in the 1970s, when I was young, I played tennis, and I would travel to play tennis, and I traveled to Los Angeles and San Diego. And back then, and this is the 1970s, the air pollution was so bad. You couldn't see sometimes 2 or 3 tennis courts down. Your visibility was just completely obscured. And when you ran, it would be choking and coughing, and some people would throw up. It was just but looking on the freeways, it's just brown. There was very little air pollution control. It was only in the 1970s that air pollution regulation really took off with the Clean Air Act amendments of 1970. But those amendments didn't affect automobile exhaust till the late 70s, and that it really took 20, 30 years before things started improving. So the pollution was so bad, and I just thought, why should people live like this? It's ridiculous that we have technologies that can make us travel, that can, computers, we can get somebody into space. Why can't we clean up this air pollution? Why do we have to be so dirty about it? And so I thought this is a problem I want to address and solve. And the climate issue, actually, within a few years of that, was starting to become more noticed, and I became interested in that as well. Yeah. So it was these two problems. And also there was acid rain, and there was the ozone layer problem. So actually all of those problems I was really interested in first understanding. And I realized, well, if you want to solve these problems, you have to understand them first, because otherwise you come up with all sorts of solutions like people do today that just do not help. Yeah. And this is, in fact, it's critical to understand the problems before you try to solve them. And I give an example of, proposal to use like ethanol as a replacement for gasoline. People claim, well, ethanol will solve the problem because of climate problem because it just results in less carbon dioxide emissions. Well, that contention itself is debatable, but the air pollution is completely ignored in that discussion. And the air pollutants, although you decrease some air pollutants, you increase others. So the net change in air pollution is really close to zero. And sometimes even arguably you get more air pollution with ethanol versus gasoline. So here you have people pushing this fuel on climate grounds, but completely ignoring the air quality impacts. The problem is burning things. When you burn things, you create pollution. So anything that involves burning, whether it's ethanol, whether it's coal, but adding carbon capture to it, where there's now natural gas, but adding carbon capture, you're still polluting with the combustion. And even when you add something like carbon capture, you're requiring more energy, like 25% more energy. So that means more fuel, more burning, more pollution. So some of these technologies actually increase air pollution rather than decrease them. And so just policies become misguided when people do not have a full appreciation for the problems that we're trying to solve. Yeah. And so I'm trying to look at it from all these aspects, air pollution, climate, energy security, and come up with solutions that address all of these at the same time.
Right. So I think, that's very much from your work that, we have a sort of motto or a guideline really for what we're trying to cover on the shows that we make, which is stop burning stuff. And I'm very aware, and that was very much from the work you've done and from the work I've read from what you've said, was that, planted that seed. And I'm very aware that it's not possible, maybe in the next 100 years, to stop burning everything. But if we turned down the amount of stuff we burnt by 90%, which I think we could do quite easily, the difference would be mind-boggling. The difference to our world and how we live would be an extraordinary change.
We have the technologies to really replace combustion-based fuels and appliances and machines with electric ones. Like their electric vehicles can replace gasoline vehicles and diesel vehicles. There are electric heat pumps can replace natural gas heaters in people's homes for air and water. You have electric machines for industry like electric arc furnaces, induction furnaces, resistance furnaces that can replace gas and oil, coal boilers for high temperature heat. Right. And you have wind turbines and solar panels and geothermal electricity and hydroelectricity that can replace coal, natural gas, and oil burning for electricity. Right. So we have, in fact, 95% of the technologies we need to eliminate all combustion for all purposes. The technologies we don't have are really that we know how to do are long distance aircraft, long distance ships to replace like jumbo jets. Air transport would probably be the most difficult technologies to transition, but we know how to do it. And there are already small planes that are electric, some hydrogen fuel cell. Hydrogen can be used for certain specific purposes, like long distance heavy transport, long distance ships, aircraft, trains, bus, trucks. For steel production, instead of using carbon to reduce iron oxide to iron, you can use hydrogen. And for some remote microgrids, for electricity and heat in remote villages, for example.
Yeah.
But we don't want to use hydrogen for too many things. Hydrogen is not efficient when it's used in a home, when you burn it like natural gas for heat. It's not efficient for passenger vehicles. It's not efficient for stationary electricity in comparison to just using batteries. And so the fossil fuel industry is actually very gung-ho on hydrogen because they want to produce the hydrogen from fossil fuels. This is a way to, this is a classic greenwashing. They say, we are green because we want to produce hydrogen, but they want to produce it not from electricity where the electricity comes from wind or solar. They want to produce it from natural gas, which most hydrogen today is already produced from natural gas. And then they want to just come up with all sorts of useless applications for hydrogen, such as piping it to people's homes to burn it, as opposed to using electric heat pumps, which are much more efficient, much cleaner. You don't result in leaks of chemicals into the air. So we have to be careful again, because the fossil fuel industry is trying to reinvent itself.
No, it's an incredibly challenging transition. I'm actually at an event the day after tomorrow, and the CEO of Shell is appearing at the same event. I'm going to go and just sit at the back and listen to him because they are claiming to be transitioning as an energy company, but it's in a sense, I have sympathy for them because it's a massive change in the way they operate. It's a colossal challenge for them, and it's not a simple. You can't flick a switch and go, okay, now we're 100% renewable. It's a really big change for all of us. But the thing I would really want to ask you, because this is a constant torrent of reports and papers and surveys and newspaper articles and pontifications from people that we can't be 100% renewable. It's not possible. We always need nuclear. We need the base load. All these arguments that I hear again and again. We need hydrogen. We will be using gas for the next 100 years. All those things. Whenever I then re-look at your work, I go, well, this guy is saying absolutely we can. And I'm assuming you're not just saying that as a political statement. You're saying it because it's based on an enormous amount of incredibly in-depth research on how we do that, how we achieve that, what materials are needed to do it, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Well, in fact, there are over 25 groups, research groups internationally that come to the same conclusion that we can
Right.
go to 100% renewable energy for all purposes and at low cost. So it's not
Yeah.
just us saying it, but yeah, we've been saying it for possibly, well, effectively the longest in terms of a
Yes.
sustained research group back till, we started looking at this issue in terms of solutions back around the year 2000, but came up with our first comprehensive energy plan for the world in 2009 to
Right.
transition to 100% renewables. And we've been looking at individual countries, of 145 countries for which data are available. We've looked at all 50 US states and over 120 international cities, how they can go to 100% renewables for all purposes. And we consistently find that we can do it at low cost and keep the grid stable and use only modest amounts of land. And this eliminates health problems. It eliminates climate emissions from each region or country. And it creates jobs
Yeah.
and more jobs than are lost on average. Although some places will lose jobs relative to others, but on average worldwide, it's 28 million more long-term full-time jobs.
Yeah.
But the energy costs are much less. This is the thing that most people don't realize, that worldwide, if we transition to 100% clean renewable energy and storage for all purposes, we reduce our energy requirements by on the order of 57%. And for five reasons. One is when you drive an electric car, for example, just uses 1/4 to 1/5 the energy as a gasoline or diesel car. When you use an electric heat pump, you use 1/4 the energy as a natural gas heater. When you use electric technologies for industry, there's a few percent reduction of the energy needed. And just eliminating the need to mine, transport, and refine fossil fuels and uranium, well, about 11 or 12% of all energy worldwide goes to those purposes. Whereas with wind and water and solar, like the wind comes right to the turbine, the solar comes right to the panel. So we don't need to dig for energy. That saves a lot of energy. And then the last thing is that just energy efficiency improvements beyond the business as usual. If we stretch our limits on energy efficiency improvements, we can get a few percent additional reduction of energy use. So when you add all those up, there's about a 57% reduction of energy demand. This means that even if the cost per unit energy is the same with fossil fuels and clean renewable energy, the annual costs are about 57% lower because you're just using 57% less energy.
Yeah.
But in fact, the cost per unit energy is now lower for renewables, and it's expected to get even lower in comparison in the future. So we anticipate maybe around a 63% or so reduction in the annual cost of energy by going to 100% renewables. That results in a payback time. Because let's say you had to invest, because worldwide it would cost about $62 trillion to invest to transition to 100% renewables for
Right.
electricity, for automobiles and other vehicles, for industry, and for buildings. Well, that would pay itself off on the order of about 6 years or so, just from the annual energy savings alone. So it's a
Right.
no-brainer. You save a lot of energy, but you save a lot of money. You create jobs, and you reduce air pollution deaths by 90% worldwide. You reduce climate problems as well. So why not do this? There's really
Yeah.
no downside to this transition.
Yeah. And I mean, it is. I can't. I'd love to be able to argue with you, but I can't because I agree with you 100%. But I mean, there is some of the arguments that I hear that are occasionally, quite challenging, which are about the extraction of materials. That we can live in our comfortable homes in developed nations and go, well, we need a load of nickel. Where's the nickel? Well, it's in the middle of Africa. Well, let's dig it up there and transport it to where we make batteries. I think the concern is, and I always want to underline this, if we repeat the really brutal, catastrophic errors of the fossil fuel industry's entire history, which is anything but benign. It's extremely, there are periods of time when the oil industry was just beyond belief in terms of its damage that it caused socially, economically, environmentally around the world. I think the concern I hear a great deal about is where we get the materials from to make, solar panels, wind turbines, batteries, which is always interesting because I'd never remember being asked where we get the materials from to build oil refineries or oil tankers, or that was never a question. That was not. That's always that was what annoys me about it, is that's normal, and what you and I are suggesting is weird. Well, I'm suggesting, no, that isn't normal. That's catastrophically bad. And what we're suggesting will become normal very quickly. But how do you counter those arguments about, strip mining lithium or copper mines or children working in cobalt extraction?
Right. Well, yeah, I first should point out that, like in the United States alone, there are 50,000 new oil and gas wells drilled every year. Well, I should say in North America, 50,000 every year. In the U.S., there are 1.3 million active oil and gas wells and 3.2 million abandoned ones. Worldwide, there are about 25 million abandoned oil and gas wells, and most of these leak methane, for example. So the amount of fossil fuel mining going on right now is orders of magnitude higher than any mining that we will need for 100% renewable energy. So the first thing is to keep that in mind. Now, there are different materials, but in the case of lithium, for example, for batteries, that's one of the concerns people have, is we'll need a huge amount of lithium. Well, lithium can be mined without any mining. In fact, in the U.S., in the Salton Sea, there's enough lithium to provide pretty much all the batteries we would need for the entire U.S. alone, by some estimates. And right now, the way we can get lithium from the Salton Sea is, there's already geothermal electricity being produced in the Salton Sea. And the same brine that is used, that brings up heat for geothermal electricity, contains lithium. So without any additional mining, you can extract the lithium from that brine for geothermal electricity. So that's one thing. The second thing is, lithium in batteries is recyclable. In fact, there are companies now that recycle batteries, like Redwood Materials is one that was started by J.B. Straubel, who's a former Tesla CTO. And they recycle 97% of all the materials in the batteries, at least 97%. And so that lithium can be used again. And then the third thing is, not when we go to 100% renewables, not only are our everyday appliances converted to running on renewable energy, but so are mines. So the mining process itself would be 100% renewable. In fact, there's a lithium mine in West Texas that's being built that is supposed to be running on 100% renewable electricity. So, can you combine these factors, and then we're minimizing the footprint of, in this case, lithium mining. And with other materials, there's a similar thing, and we can recycle. We can minimize the impact of the mining itself by using renewable energy. Sometimes we can use alternative materials, so that we don't need, if it's in a place where it's sensitive place, we can use different material or different location for the mining. But the point is that even though we're not going to eliminate mining for sure, we're going to reduce the worldwide mining by orders of magnitude compared with what's going on now. I mean, the fossil fuel industry in the U.S., it takes up 1.3% of the U.S. land area. So it's growing. As I mentioned, 50,000 new oil and gas wells every year in North America. So we'll have to keep taking up more and more land forever if we want to keep going with fossil fuels. Whereas once we get a steady state with wind, water, solar, we have a fixed amount of land we're dedicating to this solution. By the way, the amount of land we need for, let's say, the U.S. for 100% renewables for all purposes is less than 1% of the land, compared with 1.3% for the fossil fuel industry. And most of that land in the wind, water, solar case is basically empty space between wind turbines that can be used for farming, grazing, open space, or over the ocean, it's just water.
I mean, it is the difficult one that I do keep hammering on about. And I think you've underlined it, how important that is to know those facts. Because, I mean, the few times I've driven in various parts of the United States, where it's very obvious, California is one, and in Texas as well, where you just see a forest of the nodding donkeys. And you go, my goodness, because in this country, we have no concept of the scale of that industry. It just is, it's all hidden because it's either offshore or the refineries are in remote places. They're not, the general public are not aware of the colossal impact of maintaining that fuel supply, particularly for us here. You have it indigenously in the United States, but we import all of it, basically. We used to have some in the North Sea. So it's all imported here, which means I'm assuming you use that argument that my argument is always, I don't want all that money to leave this economy to pay for that fuel to be brought here. Wouldn't it be better if we made that fuel here and employed people here using that money and circulated it with it? We're sending billions of dollars every month to one or two slightly unpleasant regimes around the world.
Well, we find that every country can sustain its own energy sources and can supply its own energy with 100% renewables. There is an advantage of interconnecting the electricity grids with nearby countries so that can actually decrease the costs more. Yeah. I mean, still the costs are going to be lower than your current infrastructure, even if your country is islanded, but it decreases the costs even more by interconnecting without risking, energy security. Because, even if the other countries nearby you shut off their power, there's usually in most countries, there's enough renewable energy to supply the whole country for all purposes.
Yeah, because the recent experience, I think, and this has been a very common comment in this country, is with the situation in Ukraine with the Russian regime, Putin regime, and that the kind of knock-on impact in the energy market is that how dumb the Germans have been to get rid of their nuclear power. Is the kind of constant drumbeat. They're so dumb. They should have kept their nuclear power. Then they wouldn't have to buy Russian gas. And you just kind of, I can't evaluate how wrong that is. I just know it's wrong.
Yeah, well, it is wrong because, first of all, nuclear power is not used for heat, and a lot of that natural gas, is used for heating.
It's used for heat, exactly. Yeah.
And what they need to do is go to heat pumps for everyone, so you don't need to burn, because using a heat pump, you use 1/4 the energy as a natural gas heater.
Yeah.
And so you need basically 1/4 the electricity as you do natural gas for heat. So that's actually a very efficient way to get out of this. So Germany is going to go through some pains for a short period, but once they transition to 100% renewables, then they'll be free forever from all this tyranny of importing fuels.
Yeah, and I mean they are I think the country with the second highest penetration of heat pumps. I mean, this is often what happens is the sort of fossil fuel lobby, if you like, will make one argument, but actually what's going on the ground, this happens all around the world. I've experienced this in many places. Is people have worked out, it's cheaper for me to have a heat pump, or it's cheaper for me to put solar panels on my roof. That's why I'm doing it, not a government telling people to do it. Often, like recently in Australia, the example was a government that was fervently pro-coal. But the people in Australia, if you go to Australia and see a roof that doesn't have solar, it really stands out. Everyone's put solar panels on their roof because it makes sense. Economically, it makes sense.
I mean, I'll tell you my own story. I mean, I built a new home in 2017, and there's no gas on the property. It's run by solar panels on the roof. I have heat pumps for air heating and air conditioning, and also heat pump for water heating. I have an electric induction cooktop stove. I have 2 electric cars. I have batteries in my garage. I have LED lights, good insulation. So I have not paid an electricity bill, a natural gas bill, or a gasoline bill in almost 5.5 years.
Wow.
I produce 20% more electricity in the annual average than I generate, and I sell that back to the grid. I've been paid an average of $800 per year for the last 5 years, so that's $4,000 for the extra electricity. So not only have I not paid any bills, I get paid for my extra electricity, no pollution in my home because I'm not burning natural gas for heating or cooking. And this payback time and there are also subsidies in the U.S. and California for these. And with subsidies, the payback time was 5 years. So I've already paid off my solar and battery system. Yeah. If there were no subsidies, it'd be about a 10-year payback time. But the solar's warranted for 25 years. So it's a no-brainer. And also I saved by not putting gas on the property. I eliminated a $6,000 natural gas hookup fee. My utility would charge $6,000 just to hook up the gas from the edge of my property to my property. I avoided about $10,000 in gas pipes and more money in ditches for natural gas pipes. And with the solar, I avoided roofing with some roofing material by putting the solar on my roof, so I saved money there. And these all contributed to this fast payback time. So and it's the most comfortable home I've ever lived in my life. I mean,
Right.
every day, even on the hottest day of the year, when it's in Fahrenheit, it's about 106, 107 degrees outside. For example, I maintain a perfect temperature of whatever I want. It's usually like 75 degrees or so,
Right.
or 77, but all year I can't tell what the weather is like outside because it's
Right.
just so perfectly comfortable 24 hours a day. The way these heat
Yeah.
pumps are so efficient, they work so well. So I just tell anybody, who thinks that, by maintaining their current system that it's probably cheaper. That's just not the case.
No.
It's less comfortable. It's more expensive. It's going to be less expensive to transition yourself, even with retrofit home, even with an existing home. I mean, I had a previous home in 2005 that had fossil fuels. It had natural gas heating for air heating and water heating, and I retrofitted it back then, 2005, and
Right.
went to heat pumps for air and water heating. In particular, went to LED lights, added more insulation. These things all save you money, make your life more comfortable and more sustainable too. And right now, because natural gas prices have gone through the roof, gasoline prices have gone through the roof in the US and worldwide. And now all these people are paying. I mean, an electric car, for example, when you drive an electric car, that's equivalent to about 70 cents per gallon of gasoline.
Yeah.
Versus the cost of
Yeah.
gasoline in the U.S. now has been from anywhere from $6 to $7.50 or even $8 a gallon.
Right.
So somebody driving an electric car for 15 years at 15,000 miles per year, which is the U.S. average, they're going to save $30,000 to $40,000 in fuel costs over that life at those fuel prices. So again, it's a no-brainer from your pocketbook's perspective, but also for your comfort level and your quality of life level, to move to electricity and clean renewable sources of electricity.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is because I have the same. This is what's annoying about living in the UK. I have essentially a very similar setup in my home as the one you described, but I don't export very much electricity because there's not as much sun.
Right. Yeah. A lot depends on
you have that great advantage there. But that said, I think one of the awkward transitionary discomforts is someone who is as privileged as I am that I can afford to install that. So I have, in fact, a thermal store boiler, if you like. So not a heat pump, a very similar thing. It can store 40 kilowatt hours of heat, which I can charge it when electricity is cheap. So in a way, it's a way of shifting, a load shifting system, which heats the house. But I've got amazing water heater, everything's electric, same induction hob, all the same things you were discussing, LED lights, good insulation. But my electricity bill is so low by UK standards. And I'm a person who could technically afford a higher one, whereas there are very poor people who live in very substandard, not well insulated homes, in this country in particular, who have enormous power bills. I mean, terrifying. I mean, it would be, and it's causing a huge problem here because of the massive increase. We've had really dramatic increases in cost of particularly of gas.
Yeah, so there is the problem that there's an upfront cost to everything. So even though it pays itself off very quickly and will benefit all of these people you're referring to, they'll no longer have these large bills. There needs to be some upfront cost or payment or some financing, and this is where the government helps. So even though let's say government loan or government subsidy can help to either reduce that cost or to help finance the cost over the period of time it needs to pay itself off. But eventually, once that cost is paid off due to the savings, the energy savings and the cost savings of that energy savings, it's free energy until that equipment no longer works. And that could be 15, 20 years. Yeah. So it's definitely worthwhile. I mean, anybody who, let's say you keep driving your gasoline car today, I mean, you're going to be spending $30,000, $40,000 over the next 15 years, more than you need to.
Yeah.
So but most people don't think that far ahead. And, they're comparing, what's the cost of a new car versus what's my bill the next month.
Yeah.
That's, and some people, a lot of people actually are in a position to don't have enough financing. But there are a lot of people who, they'll buy an SUV, so they have the money to buy an
Yeah.
electric
Oh
car, but they
gosh.
choose to buy an
Yeah.
SUV.
Yeah.
That's really the
Yeah.
choice. Next time somebody has to buy a new car or even a used car, that person should go electric, and that
Yeah.
will
Of
save them
course.
a huge amount of money.
Yeah. But then, I mean, I don't know whether you've researched this, because obviously what we're discussing is the kind of transition within a fairly well-developed countries, USA, UK, Europe, Australia. But some of the stories I'm hearing coming out of places like Africa, where there has never been an infrastructure, there has never been a coal-burning power plant with pylons and power lines going across the country to substations. It just hasn't existed. And what's happening is a very rapid adoption of very small-scale, local community solar projects, where a remote town or village can actually power itself with small batteries. In a way, it seems like in a similar way to the way cell phones took over in Africa at incredible speed, and India is the same. As I've experienced it in India, not in Africa. But no one would have had a phone, because you wouldn't have had a copper wire coming to your house and a telephone, and there wasn't a telephone exchange. But within 10 years, you went from no one had a phone to, honestly, everyone I ever met in India had a phone.
Right.
And the phone network was really good. It's how you pay for things, it's how you communicate with people. Everyone, we're talking people who are on the street, poor, still had a phone. And what's fascinating is whether that, I've talked to a couple of people who've worked in Africa in the energy sector, is that jump is also possible. They haven't got to get rid of anything. They could go straight to a much cleaner, much more sustainable, much cheaper method of powering their homes, and their cars. I mean, there's a strong movement for electric vehicles in Africa, which is really interesting.
Right. Well, in places with not very good transmission, in some of these countries, they do have transmission, but there's a lot of electricity theft on the lines. So up to, in fact, I think the highest electricity theft is up to 73% or so of the electricity.
That's quite big.
Wow. In one particular country is stolen. So even having a long distance transmission line doesn't actually result in electricity production or usage in some places.
Yeah.
So the solution to that, at least in the short term, is microgrids. That is, so remote villages that are disconnected from a grid right now, they don't necessarily need to be connected to a grid. They can actually produce their own electricity, mostly from solar, but also some wind or some geothermal or hydropower or pumped hydro, depending on how close they are to those resources. But let's say it's solar with batteries. And that actually can save a lot of lives. I mentioned earlier that 7 million people die from air pollution. Well, about 40% of these are people who die from indoor burning of biomass and fossil fuels for home heating and cooking.
Yeah.
Now, so half of that's home heating and half is cooking. Well, you can replace the cooking with one single induction burner, which runs on electricity, an induction stove burner, just one of them. That costs, in the US, that costs one burner you can buy online for $30 to $50 or $60. But you need an electricity source. So a solar panel with a battery can provide electricity for home cooking.
Yeah.
And also heating too. You can use, if it's more advanced, it'd be a heat pump heater, but even a simple electric resistance heater, which is much less efficient, but it's really simple just to plug it in. That can replace the burning of dung. People sometimes they walk miles to get fuel, wood or something else to burn. And so you can eliminate the air pollution deaths in people's homes just with two simple technologies that run on electricity, then have solar and a battery to provide that electricity. Or at the village scale, have a bunch of solar panels and a few batteries to provide electricity, for everybody. And that's actually, so that works. And there are other technologies that can be added into the mix, but that's basically the most basic of what you need to provide local electricity. And then you can also charge your cell phone to watch TV. So this is really, because there are I think like 2 billion people who are either have to collect their own energy or who don't have energy or don't have access to regular energy in the world. And so we do need a solution for those people.
Yeah.
Remote microgrids can go a long way to helping solve that problem.
Yeah. And then in terms of because this is, I think, the other debate that I'm fascinated by is the kind of centralized approach to energy generation and the distributed approach. So I think once you've had the direct experience, like I have, of solar panels at my house, which are generating power, everything that I'm using now is from the sun. I mean, I haven't used any grid electricity for a number of weeks at all. So this is all from the solar and battery storage. Once you experience that, you can't then you hear of a sort of, as we're having at the moment in this country, I don't know what it is, £22 billion investment in a new centralized nuclear power plant. And I am not a sort of fanatical anti-nuclear person in terms of its history of its generating capacity and safety. Is actually pretty good. I think the waste is a huge problem that everyone always tries to ignore. But, so it's not on those bases. It's on purely economic grounds. If you have a centralized place where you're generating a huge amount of electricity, you've got to move that electricity, sometimes thousands of miles, and there's going to be losses in that, I'm guessing.
Well,
and is that the answer, or should we try and localize all our generating?
Well, having centralized power plants is an energy security risk. And the nice thing about wind and solar is they're very distributed energy sources. I mean, if one power plant goes down, that takes down a big portion of a city or a country. And especially nuclear, on top of that, it not only is about 5 to 7 or 8 times the cost of new wind or new solar, but it takes so long to build, to permit and build. So on average, it's right now between 15 and 21 years. Yeah. I mean, the Hinkley plant in Great Britain is going to be on the order of 21 years between planning and operation. Yeah. Finland, they just finished a plant that, we thought it was going to be connected to the grid this year, but this is on its 21st year.
It's still not connected. Wow.
It's still not connected. They just delayed it again another 6 months for more tests.
And that's the same design, essentially the same design as Hinkley, is it not?
Yeah. And then in France, it's the same thing. Flamanville, France, it's on the order of 19, 20 years. In the U.S., there's a Vogtle plant that two reactors that are on years 16 and 17, and their costs just went up to $33 billion. And that's turns out to be about, it was on the order of $15, $16 a watt. New wind and solar are $1 a watt.
Yeah. So, it's just really hard, isn't it? Yeah.
They've laid enough cement in that Vogtle plant to build a sidewalk from Miami to Seattle. And so you imagine all the CO2 emissions that have gone into the air.
That's crazy.
Just to build this plant, and not a single electricity piece of electricity has been generated. Yeah. So I don't know. I think it's just beyond satirical to think about that nuclear is going to help us solve any problem. It's just a money pit where people are just throwing money in because there are a lot of lobbyists for nuclear. Yeah. And it'll take 20 years basically for any new nuclear plant in liberalized markets. In China, they say they can do it faster, but even in China, it's anywhere from now 11 to 15 years. Right. And still, but they're just the subsidies going into those. We don't even know how large they are. Yeah. But still, that's just only supplying a very small portion of their power. But outside of China and a couple other places where they have huge subsidies in liberalized markets, these things are taking between 15 and 21 years now between planning and operation. They're 5 to 7 times, if you look at the annual cost of energy, 5 to 7 times the cost of new wind and solar. So, and plus then they have the meltdown risk, the weapons proliferation risk, they have the mining, uranium, lung cancer mining risk underground. They have the waste issue. You have to store the waste for hundreds of thousands of years. Why do this? It just makes no sense whatsoever. It's just boondoggle, waste of money, and we need to focus on what works. We have 8 years till 2030 to solve 80% of the problem. When you have a technology that takes 15 to 21 years, That cannot solve the problem. Nuclear cannot solve the problem one bit. Now they're talking about, let's use small modular reactors that won't even be ready, even by their own plans, but till 2030. And that's everything in the nuclear industry is delayed, so it probably won't even be ready till later. And only a couple prototypes will be ready by then. And so, and the cost, there's no proof that the cost won't even be higher than conventional reactors, because the reason we have large reactors is because of economies of scale. It's cheaper to build a large reactor. They used to try to build small ones. Those are more expensive. Now they're going back to the more expensive, smaller ones, just trying to claim that the cost will be lower. Just no proof of that. Yeah. They have even more weapons proliferation risk, because these things can be shipped around the world, and you can import uranium to run it, and you can harvest plutonium from the fuel rods. You can, and there's use the uranium secretly to, like they're doing in Iran, to in centrifuges to try to refine it more. So it's just a weapons proliferation risk. There's still meltdown risk. There's still waste issue risk. There's still high cost. And in terms of how long it takes, I mean, there's no proof it's going to take any less time than conventional reactors.
Yeah. The last one I want, because that's great. Thank you so much, Mike. That was I love the Miami to Seattle sidewalk. That's just, because I had to think for it, because I do have a fairly good understanding of American geography. And then I went, oh, that really is right across the whole thing. That's the longest distance you can do.
It's like if you think of the U.S. as a rectangle, that's a diagonal across from one corner to the other.
Yeah. It's crazy. But then the other one, which I just find, which really gets my goat, really gets me, is carbon capture and storage. So I did an episode about carbon capture and storage in 2012 to be fair. And it was an experimental system at Imperial College in London. Really clever people working on it. And it worked in the circumstances that they created in a laboratory. And so that sounded like a solution. And I went, oh, that's really good. It's better to capture it than it is just to release it out the top of a chimney. It's the amazing amount of print and talk about CCS, but no actual. It just isn't there. There's one or two places that have tried it. It costs so much more to do. And storage. It was the storage bit that I thought that is a lie. There's no other way of describing it. How do you store carbon? Unless it's in solid blocks of building material, I can understand that, which is one of the things discussed. But you'll know more about it. But it just sounds like such a fossil fuel funded con.
Well, yeah, it is a con. I mean, carbon capture is a total greenwash. It's a scam. I don't know. There are other words for it. Yeah. Like, think about it. There's one coal plant in the U.S., the Texas Parish plant, that had carbon capture added to it. So it cost $1 billion for the carbon capture equipment and the energy source to power the carbon capture equipment. But just give you an idea of how ridiculous this is. So they put carbon capture equipment on part of a coal plant to try to capture the emissions from part of this coal plant. But they built a natural gas plant just to provide the electricity to run the equipment for the coal plant, the carbon capture in the coal plant. So, I mean, how insane is that? And then, so they didn't capture any of the carbon from the natural gas plant. They just burned the natural gas, and that CO2 went to the air, and they weren't counting for that. Then they had to go mine for the gas, so they had to dig more mines. These drilling part of the 50,000 new oil and gas wells every year. And then they transport it. So on average, like 3.5% of the methane from that natural gas well and the piping, the processing, leaks to the air. That counts. And methane is on a 20-year time frame is 86 times the global warming potential as carbon dioxide. So it's the warming per unit mass is basically 86 times over a 20-year time frame that of CO2. And then they don't capture all the carbon from the coal plant because the carbon capture equipment is not as efficient as when it's running. Let's say when it's running perfectly, it has a certain efficiency that might be 90% or 92% or something. But first of all, it doesn't run all year, and because it's for maintenance, and not only for maintenance, but sometimes because the CO2 where was it being piped? They then built some pipes for the CO2 and sent it to a nearby oil field to bind with the oil. The CO2 would bind with the oil to make it less dense, so it'd come to the surface faster. Wow. And so they can actually extract more oil. Well, that process releases 40% of all the CO2 that's captured goes right back to the air. Wow. Nobody accounts for that. But when you actually account for the fact that you're not accounting for any of the CO2 from the coal plant, that from the upstream mining of the coal, the transport of the coal, and only a portion of this burned coal CO2 is captured. So when all is said and done, before you even count for what happens to the CO2 after the capture, over a 20-year time frame, the capture rate was about 11%.
Right.
And the net capture rate, when you count for all the emissions that weren't captured, and you count for the methane, it's 11%. And then of that, 40% gets lost in the enhanced oil recovery process. So we're talking on the order of 6 or 7% capture rate at best. But there's no proof that even that was captured. That goes into the oil field, and they claim it stays there. But who knows? What evidence do we have? So this thing was so inefficient, and so expensive, and it's just basically a tax on poor people. Because that $1 billion, who's paying for it? Well, they add it to the rates of the electricity consumers. And who has the highest fraction of their income going to electricity payments? Well, it's poorer people. So those are the people who are going to pay a higher fraction of their income to electricity for this capture. Whereas it turns out if you had just used that money and instead purchased wind turbines to replace the coal plant, you would not only reduce more CO2, but you would eliminate the air pollution from the coal plant and the mining of the coal. So whereas the carbon capture equipment, it does not reduce any air pollution. It just increases the air pollution on the order of 25% because you need 25% more energy to run the carbon capture equipment. And all that the natural gas combustion not only produce CO2, but air pollutants. So you have more air pollution. You have more mining. In this case, you have mining of natural gas, and you have mining of coal that would have been avoided if you replaced the coal with wind. And more infrastructure. You have all these pipes that you're building. So it's just an insane juggernaut of just all this equipment, and it's just like confusing the public. Like the people will think, oh, this must be doing something good. It's just spending a lot of money on nothing useful. Just making air pollution worse, making the mining worse, using more land, and hardly reducing any CO2. Yeah. That's the net of carbon capture.
But then it allows CEOs and politicians to say, we will capture the carbon in future and all that. Yeah.
They're capturing fairy dust, basically.
They're capturing fairy dust and storing it in a porous sack. Yes. In a net. They're storing it in a net. Mark, you've been amazing. That's such a brutal and very comprehensive takedown of the myth of carbon capture and storage. I can't wait to see the comments on that. That'll be good. But I just want to thank you for not only appearing on the show, but for the work you're doing and for continuing to battle on. I mean, I'm really impressed with what you do. It's fascinating, and you've been incredibly inspirational to the work I've done. I just want you to know that.
Well, thank you.
That's it. But thank you so much for taking the time to talk today.
I'm happy to be on the show. Thank you very much for having me on.
Well, I really hope you enjoyed that. It was fantastic to talk to Mark. It was a great. I think the biggest single influence on what I've done in the last 12 years is that man you've just been listening to. I think that's a truer word has not been spoken. Stop burning stuff. That whole notion of how we can live without burning things came back partly from personal experience, but a huge amount from reading what he was saying. So I'm really glad to get Mark on the show. Really praying we can get him to Fully Charged Live San Diego. That's all. Please do look at the Patreon link that's in the show notes of this episode, and also do spread the word. If you enjoy this podcast and the people we get on here, please do tell your friends and family. That really helps. Word of mouth is still the best form of communication. And subscribe as well. If you subscribe to this podcast, you won't miss any of our gorgeous future episodes. And that's it. As always, if you have been, thank you for listening.